Tonight, recovery teams continue to search for victims in Texas, with close to 200 people still missing in the storms. And with the death toll climbing, mounting questions about how this happened.
Plus, Russia launches a massive new attack on Ukraine as President Trump changes his tune on Vladimir Putin.
He's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless.
Tonight, talks of new U.S. sanctions against the Kremlin.
And getting political from the pulpit. The IRS issues an exemption allowing pastors to talk more freely about politics in the church.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Rescue workers and volunteers forge ahead with the grueling search for victims as cleanup efforts continue in Texas. Good evening from Washington. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder. An estimated 160 people are still missing tonight after the historic floods that swept through central Texas last week.
And President Trump plans to visit tomorrow to consult communities clinging to their faith, while Christian ministries deliver relief to first responders. CBN News' Paul Petit has our top story.
The Guadalupe River is as dry now as it was in the days before the July 4th flood. The pain of what happened here, however, still runs deep.
This is something that's going to go with this community forever.
Pastor Phil Jackson of Kerrville First Assembly lost one of his church members that night.
In trying to save his family, he punched a hole through the glass window and he cut his main artery and he bled out in front of his family. It died.
Like many in this tight-knit town, Jackson is channeling grief into action. His church has teamed up with Operation Blessing, using its kitchen to prepare and deliver hundreds of hot meals to first responders still searching for the missing.
They have pulled several bodies out of the river. It makes you realize that for me, as a chef, we provide food for those people that they need to take care of themselves.
Behind me is the Centerpoint Distribution Center in Kirk County. It's a place where first responders gather. It's also a place where volunteers come with their trucks, their heavy equipment. They even come on 4 legs.
All the crews you see working out here, we carry their chainsaws, their fuel, all the stuff that they have to carry in. Mission
mules came from North Carolina, where they responded to the 2024 floods caused by Hurricane Helene. And now they're here.
I wake up in the morning and I just feel like this is your chance to serve.
Joe Marin, who runs a hat company, delivered a different kind of help.
So just handing them something like this, I saw their face light up.
Chaplain Robert Kuhn is here to encourage, not just in words, but in spirit.
It's a beautiful thing when you watch the Holy Spirit intervene and let them know that their Lord will never leave them or forsake them, just as he promised in Hebrews 13:6.
And the gospel is reaching the highest levels of government. President Trump's cabinet bowed in prayer Tuesday for the flood victims.
Those families that are hurting, Father God, we pray for a peace that surpasses all understanding.
President Trump is expected to visit Kirk County on Friday, where he'll find unquestionable faith in the midst of unimaginable destruction.
One thing that we can all do is pray, and that's the message. Y'all pray and keep praying.
In Kirk County, Texas, Paul Petit.
All right, thank you, Paul. Well, overseas tonight, new developments could potentially turn the tide in Ukraine. A massive overnight attack by Russia, just ahead of a planned meeting between Secretary of State Marco Rubio and his Russian counterpart in an attempt to chart a path to peace.
That's right. It all follows growing frustration within the Trump administration about Vladimir Putin and the lack of progress made in ending the nearly 3.5-year conflict.
National security correspondent Caitlin Burke joins us now with the latest. Caitlin, did anything come from Secretary Rubio's meeting today?
John, Jenna, the secretary describes his conversation with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov as very frank, relaying President Trump's disappointment and frustration that there's not more flexibility on the Russian side. And Rubio adds they discussed how to move forward, and he will be returning to Washington with new ideas for President Trump's consideration.
I think it's a new and a different approach. Again, I wouldn't characterize it as something that guarantees a peace, but it's a concept that we'll take back to the president today.
These latest peace talks occurring shortly after the U.S. resumed shipments of defensive weapons to Ukraine.
What we've done here at the Department of Defense is create a framework to analyze what munitions we're sending where to help the President and the Secretary of Defense make decisions.
Now, the president also considering granting Ukraine's request for another Patriot air defense system.
When you talk about a system like that, highly sophisticated, tremendous amount of money, and they're doing it because they want to prevent death. They're getting hit hard, very hard. So we're looking at it.
This increased backing by the U.S. preceding an escalation in attacks from Russia. The most recent came overnight against Kyiv, killing at least 2 people and injuring dozens of others.
The attack involved Russian, Iranian Shahid drones. These drones have been heavily upgraded to cause more destruction and to be harder to shoot down. Ukrainians now face attacks by hundreds of these drones every single night. And this is pure terrorism.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Italy this week, meeting with European allies. The EU committing billions of dollars to help Ukraine rebuild and move forward.
We will ensure that Ukraine is supported until 2028 and beyond, when the new European budget kicks in.
Back in Washington, Congress preparing to impose harsh sanctions on Russia. If passed, they could be used as leverage in ending the war.
In response to the recent criticism from the Trump administration, a spokesman from the Kremlin told reporters Wednesday Moscow is, quote, quite calm about it. John, Jenna?
All right, Caitlin, thank you very much. And turning to the war in Gaza now, Israeli officials say a peace deal between Hamas and Israel is inching closer by the day. This is after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spent the week meeting with U.S. officials to hammer out the details.
CBN senior White House correspondent Kelly White attended a reception with the Prime Minister last night, and he joins us now after a late night. Kelly, welcome to you. So what have you learned about the ceasefire negotiations between Hamas and Israel? Did you hear anything at the reception that caught your ear?
John, I heard quite a bit at last night's reception. It was a pleasure and an honor to attend the reception that Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, had provided to give his thanks to U.S. troops as well as the U.S. President Donald Trump and America for standing by Israel throughout this entire time. He even thanked the president for helping them end the 12-day war that Israel had with Iran. And he went on to talk about his hopeful response to being asked questions about, will the hostages be returned home? Netanyahu acknowledged the relatives of 12 members of the hostages' families who were present during last night, and he gave these remarks. He says, these hostages are suffering in terrible dungeons of these monsters. At least 20 are alive, he stated, and we're committed to getting all of them, including the 30 dead hostages, out and brought home. He believes that they have spent many hours, he and the president, as well as the delegation in Doha, and he believes that they will be able to get them all out within the next week to 2 weeks. President Trump echoes that same sentiment. John?
Kelly, can you key us in on any other information you learned about Israel's efforts to fend off attacks from various groups?
Well, they have stated that they are operating with a diplomatic means of peace through strength, starting first with strength and then extending that to peace. He stated that he is definitely looking at the fact that Hamas cannot be in power, and he's also stated that if Iran were to try to rebuild its nuclear enrichment program, that Israel would not hesitate to defend itself, stating that Israel is capable of defending itself alone, but it is a welcome sight to have the United States standing alongside of them.
Kelly, lastly, so the White House is wading into another foreign battle, this time involving Brazil and its former president, Jair Bolsonaro. What can you tell us about that?
Well, to be real quick about it, the president has raised the tariffs on Brazil some 50% in response to the trial that is underway against the former president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, who is being tried for what happened in 2022 when he is accused of trying to overturn that election that did not go his way. The president stating that he believes that Bolsonaro is in a trial that is a witch hunt. Critics are saying the president is using tariffs in this case as a political weapon. John?
All right, senior White House correspondent Kelly Wright. Kelly, thank you for doing double duty last night and this afternoon.
My pleasure.
Well, coming up, pastors and politics. How a new decision from the IRS may change what you hear from the pulpit. More Faith Nation right after this. Welcome back. Pastors may now freely discuss politics from the pulpit without fear of losing their tax-exempt status. In a Texas court filing, the Internal Revenue Service issued an exemption to part of a 70-year-old tax provision known as the Johnson Amendment.
Yeah, the move comes after 2 churches and the national religious broadcasters sued the agency for violating their freedom of speech. The filing states it's now acceptable for a, quote, house of worship to speak to its congregation, quote, concerning electoral politics viewed through the lens of religious faith.
This new filing in the court implements this widespread understanding by churches that when we're talking about these issues as a family, it's basically the same thing as gathering around the kitchen table with your family and having these sorts of sane conversations.
And President Trump has called for the repeal of the entire Johnson Amendment. For now, though, the IRS says that only churches are exempt.
Well, for more, let's bring in Brad Jacob. He's the Associate Dean and a professor at Regent University School of Law, as well as Jack Jenkins, national reporter with Religion News Service. Welcome to both of you. So, Jack, starting with you, you have some applauding this move, some decrying this move. How exactly does this change by the IRS? How does it change the precedent when it comes to the Johnson Amendment?
So the thing to keep in mind is that the Johnson Amendment has been around for several decades now. Technically what it does is it prohibits, if you were to endorse from the pulpit, specifically endorsing candidates is usually the example people list. If you were to do that, you risk losing your tax-exempt status. The problem is that this provision is rarely enforced as it is. In fact, at least one conservative Christian organization used to organize what was called Pulpit Freedom Sunday, where thousands of pastors would deliver endorsements in sermons, record them, and then mail them to the IRS and, basically dare the IRS to do anything about it. And the IRS almost never did. So there's a difference between the kind of chilling effect that this provision has had in terms of dissuading some from endorsing and the fact that so many faith leaders actually already endorse, and the IRS just hasn't taken much action to enforce the provision.
Yeah, for pastors who have not waded in to endorse candidates or take a political position, Jack, does this now put some pressure on them to go there?
So this is an interesting dynamic, right? Is that, there was a poll that we had from Lifeway relatively recently that only 2% of Protestant pastors in that poll had actually kind of said that they had endorsed themselves from the pulpit. And, some pastors have told us that the provision has actually allowed them to kind of deflect pressure from their congregations when sometimes there is pressure to endorse or express support for one candidate or another. Although it is worth noting that a 2023 Public Religion Research Institute poll found that majorities of all major religious groups in the United States, and that includes white evangelicals, black Protestants, Catholics, what have you, oppose or strongly oppose allowing churches to endorse and still remain tax exempt. So this is not necessarily a popular idea in the pews.
Brad, I want to bring you into this this conversation. You just heard what Jack had to say. This has long been a position for conservatives, particularly evangelical conservatives. I do want to read this, though. There's a statement by Jewish leaders that says that this repeal or this provision not being enforced isn't about free speech. It's about radically altering campaign finance laws. And here's the quote. They wrote that repealing or weakening the Johnson Amendment risks dividing charities and houses of worship along partisan lines. At a time when our political climate is already so polarized, we stand firmly against any measure that would bring politics into our organizations and reduce our effectiveness. So who does this decision benefit the most?
Well, I actually think it benefits everyone, although obviously some may not agree with that. The Johnson Amendment is widely violated. There are liberal, including historically black churches, liberal churches that go to the pulpit and endorse Democrats. There are conservative and populist churches that go to the pulpit and endorse Republicans, as Jack said, rarely enforced. Only once in a while has somebody pushed the issue to make the IRS take action. It's almost certainly unconstitutional to tell a pastor that you cannot, in your context of your church community, stand in the pulpit and say, hey, I think all Christians should vote for Donald Trump, or I think all Christians should vote against Donald Trump, or whatever the position may be, seems clearly to fall within constitutionally protected free speech. This is a lousy provision. It shouldn't be in the Internal Revenue Code. Congress ought to repeal it, but we have a very dysfunctional Congress. Congress isn't doing its job in most cases. The courts would strike it down if we get all the way through litigation. So in this case, the IRS is basically just caving to the obvious and saying, we can't enforce this, we shouldn't enforce this, and so we're not going to enforce this. Now, if a church goes beyond just internally communicating, this is our faith view of this election, and starts spending a lot of money on a campaign, then you're going to run up against the amendment again. And there's other ways one could deal with that. For example, there's another provision of Section 501c3 that says nonprofits cannot put a substantial part of their activities, of their resources, into lobbying for bills, for or against bills. If Congress would put that same standard in, this would all be fine. You could speak from the pulpit, not have a problem, but you couldn't start pouring money into election campaigns. But I think if a church does start pouring money into a campaign, they're still going to have a problem. What the IRS is saying wouldn't stop that from being enforced. This is simply about speech from the pulpit, and it ought to be protected.
Jack, a quick final thought?
Yeah, I do think it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I'll note that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops issued a statement shortly after this news broke, making clear that the position of their tradition and those of bishops is to not endorse, irrespective of whether or not it's allowed.
Okay. Brad Jacobs and Jack Jenkins, thank you both so much. Great to see you, gentlemen.
Thanks, guys.
Up next, a ceasefire between Iran and Israel is holding for now. Why Israeli citizens say the battle isn't over.
Well, welcome back. The push to restore religious freedom in Ukraine and Russia continues.
Yet today, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF, held a hearing identifying the dangerous spike in recent violations since the war began. Hundreds of religious leaders have been unjustly jailed by the Russians, killed and tortured. Violations include destruction of countless houses of worship in Russian-controlled territories. Today, various witnesses shared incidents of persecution with the committee and recommended improvements in the U.S.'s current policies towards Russia.
Well, now turning to the ongoing tensions between Iran and Israel. Despite claims of total obliteration, Israeli intelligence now says some of Iran's uranium may not have been destroyed during the recent U.S. airstrikes, an idea that only heightens fears among Israelis.
In the aftermath of the 12-day war with Iran, one Israeli Arab influencer says the threat from Iran will continue until the regime is dealt with. Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has the story from Jerusalem.
As both Israel and the U.S. hail the great victory over Iran and its nuclear program in the 12-day June war, many Israelis are uneasy and feel there's more to be done.
Make no mistake, the IDF won big time. Big time. What we did in the last 12 days is unprecedented. It's unbelievable. It is one of the greatest victories of our country and our IDF. But the fact is that we have not completed the job.
Israeli journalist and advocate for Israel, Yosef Haddad, says the Iranian regime is proud of targeting Israeli civilians, which shows why they must be destroyed and not just weakened. Haddad spoke to CBN News at the site of the Iranian missile attack in Beersheba, in which 4 Israelis were killed around the time the ceasefire was declared. He likened the current situation to Europe at the end of World War II.
Imagine if in World War II, America and Britain and its allies said, you know what, we won, but we're not going to eliminate completely the Nazis and destroy Hitler. We're just going to keep him as weak as he is. Do you think Hitler would neglect his final solution? It's exactly what the IRGC and the Ayatollah is the same thinking, which means they're not neglecting their last solution. And their last solution is to arrive at a nuclear bomb in order for them to destroy the little devil and to reach the big devil, which is the United States.
At the end of World War II, Germany surrendered unconditionally, and the Allied forces divided the country into 4 zones. German leaders and military officials were tried for war crimes at Nuremberg. The Allies also worked to change the ideology.
What we're doing here right now is actually fighting for the whole free world, for the whole Western world. And we're putting the Israeli civilians in danger doing so. Continue fighting the IRGC, eliminating the IRGC, free the Iranian people, and bring security to Israeli civilians, both Arabs and Jews.
Meanwhile, Israel police spokesman Dean Elsden says the police are working proactively to thwart Iranian attempts at drafting spies and getting information inside Israel.
We have over 23 cases of indictments for espionage, where Iranians are trying to use civilians here in Israel through financial ways, offering them money to complete seamlessly simple tasks by sending pictures, sending locations, and then it works its way up to even assassination attempts in providing information of sensitive areas.
Elsden told CBN News that Israel police are on top of it and are working to secure Israel's borders. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Beersheba.
Thank you, Julie. Well, still ahead, restoring comfort to displaced children, one stuffed animal at a time. That's next on Faith Nation.
Finally tonight, a special project that's reuniting kids with their favorite toys.
That is right. As natural disasters, and we've seen so many as of late, wipe away homes and belongings, 2 mothers launched a project to help replace comfort items for kids. It's called the Lost Stuffy Project, created by sisters-in-law Randy Jaffe and Jenny Jaffe during the Los Angeles fires earlier this year. The project raises money to buy new versions of stuffed animals and blankets for displaced children and their families. As mothers themselves, the founders say they know how important comfort items are for kids, and it's a small way to give them back some control.
Yeah, that's so nice to see.
So
kids
very thoughtful.
love stuffed animals.
And meaningful, that's right.
All right, that's going to do it for Faith Nation.
Have a great night.